Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. This is Funny Like a Clown podcast, whatever part of the world you are tuned in from. This is episode 95, January 19th, 2021. As always, Funny Like a Clown podcast is brought to you by G Vegas Buffalo Sauce for the spicy, sweet, savory taste of game time. There is only one G Vegas available at www.gvegas.webs.com. We do comedy here, and on the phone I have a guy who most people in comedy could only dream of reaching the level he has in comedy. He's a regular on the comedy scene other than USA, places like England, Australia, Ireland, Scotland, Canada, France, Holland, Hong Kong. For over 17 years, he worked on The Late Show with David Letterman as part of the audience warm-up and the talent coordinator. Eddie Brill, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much. I really appreciate it very much. I'm still like thinking about hot sauce. I was like, oh, hot sauce.
Who don't like a good buffalo sauce?
I'm such a fan of hot sauce, I have to tell you,
All right.
I have a friend in L.A. who makes hot sauce, and I can't get enough. There was years when I first moved, after college, moved back to New York. We worked at this restaurant, and underneath the restaurant that we did, these music and comedy shows. And we didn't really get much money, but they would pay us in hot sauce. So I had tons of hot sauce in
there you go.
People would come visit me in my little studio apartment, and I had all this hot sauce, but no food.
Can't go wrong with a good. Well, I'm from Boston. Up here, sports is everything, and you can't watch the game without some good buffalo wings. I mean, that's part of game
very
time.
Much so. Where in Boston are you? In Boston or the suburbs?
I'm in the suburbs. I'm in Central Mass. I'm out here, yeah. So close to the Worcester area. Worcester.
Yeah, I know it. I used to work in the morning at AAS, which was in Worcester.
Really?
Yeah.
Legendary station. They just recently went to all Christian music after years of rock and roll. It was quite the change.
Yeah, well, after I was there, they had to.
That was it, right? Okay.
I sullied their station. But no, I spent a lot of time near Worcester. Well, first of all, I went to college with Dennis Leary, who's from Worcester, and Mike McGinn. Two of the guys in our comedy group in college were both from Worcester. So we spent a lot of time there, and actually I got to open sort of for Bob Dylan at the Worcester Centrum.
Wow.
Me and Brian Kiley and I think Wally Collins. I think we were the three. So, I spent a lot of time out there. And I went to Emerson in Boston.
Yeah, right. We're gonna talk about that in the podcast. Well, I feel like I got the Yoda of comedy on the phone with me here. There's so much I want to ask you. You've done so much in a legendary career, but we got to start somewhere. Let's take it back to the beginning.
Well, we started with hot sauce. That was
that's a good start. All right, but I mean, well, before all this success happened for you in comedy, you were a young guy. What gave you the itch to get into the business of comedy?
Well, I didn't really think I would. I mean, when I was in high school, I was mostly a good student, but I did some fun things. I wrote for the local newspaper, which I really loved. I really loved writing. I love words. That's why I love George Carlin, and I love George Carlin, but I never thought I'd do stand-up. It wasn't something that was, something that I thought of. Like, my mom and dad were very young, and they loved comedy, loved. And my mom was really one of the funniest people you would ever want to meet. She was funny and down to earth and sarcastic, and in addition to that, our house was full of comedy albums. And in those days, it was the Smothers Brothers and Bob Newhart and Shelley Berman and Flip Wilson and all that kind of
the
stuff
legends.
was in our house. So we there was always like funny, and we always loved funny movies, and so there was a lot of funny in our house. And I always appreciated the writing, so I was writing for a while, and then I got to be an announcer at the high school football games in Hollywood, Florida. I was born in New York, but I moved to Florida when I was 11, and it was really fun. Again, I got all this publicity, for the newspaper, publicity for being the announcer, because I used to do a Howard Cosell impression. And I went to South Broward High School, and they called me Broward Cosell.
Can we hear it? Give us the Howard Cosell impression. Let's hear it.
It's never going to be as good as
never,
it was
okay.
when I was a kid, but it was like, it was Broward Cosell, and he talked like this, and I did the games that way. And and then I got an article written about me, and then I would work with the Miami Dolphins and, their charities, announcing the games, and all of a sudden I went from just liking math and science and being the biggest nerd to the biggest nerd who also liked comedy. And I had an uncle who went to. I was going to go for broadcast journalism. I had a stepfather who was amazing, and he died very young. He was 37, died of cancer. Not to bring you down, but it was an important part of my life. He was an amazing man, and I was very, very tight with him. And all of a sudden, he dies 37, and I said, you know what, life's too short, and I'm gonna do something I love. And I was looking for a college that had broadcast journalism, and my uncle, who taught at UMass Amherst, which is not far from where you live, was
My son attended there.
yeah, he told me that about Emerson. So I checked it out. I ended up, getting to go there, and all of a sudden, the first couple of weeks of college, I met all these funny people, and we formed a comedy group. And
Now, that was with Norman Lear, correct?
What's that?
That was with Norman Lear that you formed that with?
Yeah, well, Norman Lear had gone to Emerson just like us, and we had a comedy group, and it was very successful. And for some weird reason, the school was kind of jealous. Like, not the school, it's not the buildings. The buildings were fine,
right.
But the people who inhabited the drama department, they were a little jealous of our success. We weren't really getting help.
Why didn't we think of this?
Norman Lear came to visit the college, and I met him, and I told him what we were doing, and he donated money to the school, and the school matched it, and we formed this comedy writing department in the college, and started to get, incredible help from, I'll give you an example. At the time, I started college in '76. Saturday Night Live started in '75. So there was a woman who had graduated Emerson named Marilyn Suzanne Miller, who was the head writer over at Saturday Night Live, and she came back to the college, and she helped our comedy group out. And at the same time, Norman Lear, and there was just so many. Jerry Paris, who was the neighbor on Dick Van Dyke, but also directed a lot of the shows. Harvey Miller, who was the writer for The Odd Couple. So all of these people came back to our school because of Norman Lear, and we got such an education in comedy. And, all of a sudden, I'm getting laughs on stage, and I love the way it feels, as you can imagine.
Oh, yeah. Now, that started in the 70s, and that still exists today, right? They still have it at the college? There's still a comedy workshop?
Yeah. We started in 1976, and it's, here we
are,
going, 45, the numbers, 76 carried the forward, 34, 20, but 21 is 55 years. So,
wow.
I don't know. My math is usually good, but that's why I went to college for.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a responsibility of comics to give back to the young comics, but how does that make you feel to know that, so many comics that might have come out of there that you gave them an opportunity like that?
Yeah, it's incredible. Bill Burr and David Cross and Laura Keitlinger and Jen Kirkman and, Anthony Clark and, I think I said David Cross, and, there's so many great comedians that came out of Emerson because of something we started back in '76, which was 45 years ago. There's my math. So it was. It's really nice that this opportunity came, and we didn't do it originally to give opportunity. We just did it because we really loved it, and we went to school with Stephen Wright, and Stephen Wright was our really good friend, and he would do some bits in our workshop like film stuff, and we had a lot of funny friends. And
he started out with all the guys before they were famous. They were like just coming up. But Stephen Wright was just coming up back then. He wasn't famous yet, right?
It was, and then he, so we would all do a little stand up, and because we all thought it was, fun. Let's try it. Emerson was mostly for improv and sketch, but there was a great comedy scene. There was a bunch of young guys like Don Gavin and Steve Sweeney,
the Godfather,
Lenny Clark. And all these guys in Boston were very, they were like comedy was king. Barry Crimmins led the whole scene there.
The Ding Ho.
Yeah, the Ding Ho. When I got to perform at the Ding Ho back in the day,
Really?
It was really cool.
Were you around when the Tonight Show came there to take a look at the comics, or?
I wasn't. I was already in New York then.
Oh, you were already in New York? Okay.
I had moved back to New York after college was over. I had taught a kids program at Emerson. And then in the summer of 1980, I moved back to New York. But I spent a lot of time in Boston going back and forth because there was money. You could make money in Boston in those days in stand-up. And so I would go back and forth. And we knew Steven, and we heard, when they, Peter LaSalle came to look for comedians. There was an article written in the Los Angeles paper about this comedy venue, the Ding
Right.
Ho, and he went to check it out. Well, he really didn't go there to look at comics, but his kids were looking at
Looking at
colleges.
colleges, right?
Yeah,
However you get him to town. He was in town. It worked out, right?
it worked out beautifully,
Wow.
and that's how Stephen Wright got his big break. And when he got his big break, we all were there with. We felt that we were there with him on stage. We were very proud of him.
Well, you got your big break. I mean, how did it lead to just starting out and enjoying comedy to leading to the David Letterman show, which every comic could dream to be on?
It actually started. I had quit stand-up after college. I tried it a bunch, and I had some bad experiences. I was getting laughs when I was in Boston because it was mostly our friends, and it was
Right.
fun. But real audiences, I was too nervous and too green at it, and I wasn't really accepted in the scene at the beginning. I had some typical comedian horrible experiences, but in 1984, an opportunity came to me to run a comedy club in the West Village, and the venue was called the Paper Moon. So in 1984 July, I started this comedy club, and it became very successful. And then that led me to I ended up getting seen for television. I used to work on Tuesday nights a lot at the bitter end around the corner, and Ed McMahon's daughter Claudia saw me, got me on Star Search. I went to LA. LA was exciting. And then I started doing warm-up out in LA a little bit because it was great money, and I warmed up the show Saved by the Bell, which was
Teenage classic right there, yeah.
Yeah, but what's funny? It was like babysitting. It wasn't really, it wasn't thrilling. The two thrilling things about warming up Saved by the Bell was, most importantly, it was across the hall from the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, literally across the hall.
Wow.
And also, I made enough money to be able to live. It was a very good paycheck.
You can get paid. That's how it counts, yeah.
Yeah, so then I had a great time in LA. I was treated really well by amazing comedians. Sam Kinison was one of the main guys who helped me out and gave me the many spots and made sure that I worked a lot. It was a real community there. It was a little crazy and drug fueled and fun, crazy, but when it came to doing comedy, we were all very serious about it, and it was really great. But the opportunity. I came back to New York in '90. Started traveling around the world, going to Europe a lot, and doing that. And then I got a job warming up the Dana Carvey show, which was a brilliant comedy show. It was too smart for television.
Right.
And Louis C.K. was writing on that show, and then he ended up getting a job at the Letterman show as a writer. And so Letterman was looking for a warm-up, and Louis recommended me, and that's how there was also a guy named Bill Sheft who worked there as a writer, and so, a couple of people recommended me, and I got the job at the Letterman show.
Made some friends, made some connections, and bam. That's
What's
great.
that?
You made some friends, you made some connections, and it led to David Letterman for you. That's like the classic story.
Yeah, it was really great, and it was a 6-week trial period that lasted 17 years. It was an incredible experience that I'm so thankful that I had.
Well, before we move on to the next part here, you hit my soft spot with Sam Kinison. What's your favorite memory of Sam? Here's a quick story.
Well, there's so many great stories. Well, what was great about Sam is that he would close all the shows late at night, and all the comedians would run to go watch him because he was so inventive and he was so funny and so great. And also, he had a band of comedians, and I was lucky enough to sing with that band or play percussion with that band. So I'm on stage with Kinison, and he's playing guitar, and him and Carla Bove, and they're playing guitar, and I'm singing with the band, and it's just like, it was like a weird dream come true. One time with Kinison, there was some woman picked me up at the comedy club and took me home to her house, and we had a lot of fun together, and she gave me this coat as a gift. And I went back to the comedy store, and I wore this like sort of red long coat, and Kinison goes, "Where'd you get that?" And I said, this girl gave it to me. He laughed really hard. He goes, "That's my coat." I owed her money, and she kept my coat as a
collateral.
thing, and I guess she wanted me to, to remind me because she knew that I knew you. So I was like sort of caught in the middle with, and I said, "Well, here, take the coat." He goes, "No, you keep it." And I had it for years and years and years. And it's funny because I had just come back from having, sexual relations with this young woman, and then I went back to where I was staying, and there was a woman visiting my roommate who had passed out, and then she asked if she could wear the coat, so she took all her clothes off and put the coat on, and then I had sex with this woman. So that red coat had brought me a lot of great experiences.
The wild stories of the Sam Kinison days, right there. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
No, actually, I flew up to Alaska. I opened up a Karl Lvov up there. He's a great guy. I'm friends with him.
He's so great and so funny.
I'm friends with Sam's brother Bill too. I stayed over at his house out in LA one night. The next day, he pulled out all of Sam's old coats. Me and my friend, we got to try them on. It was like visiting Graceland and getting to touch this stuff. But it was great. Great people.
Yeah, I knew Sam's brother Kevin very well. I became very close with him. He became one of my best friends out in L.A.
Really?
He had unfortunately taken his own life, but I was very close with him. It was hard. I didn't know Bill as well. Bill, I was around from like '86 to '90. It was that was the era, and Bill wasn't out there as much, or didn't really hang out with us that much during those days. But I knew Kevin pretty well. And so, Sam was really happy that I was very close and took care of his brother, as much as I could.
Yeah. He was a very close family guy. So you mentioned Louis C.K. gave you a recommendation for the Danny Carvey show. Now, you've taped over 100 TV shows in 6 different countries, 10 appearances on Late Night, but one of the other series you were on the FX, the hit series Louis, and that was Louis C.K.'s show. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we had a poker game that started about 25 years ago in my apartment, and we started playing poker, and it became a big thing. And all the biggest names eventually in comedy were playing cards at my house, and if you weren't playing cards, you were playing Nintendo or Sega. Every Monday night, I used to host a show at Caroline's every Monday night, and after the show was over, we'd all meet at my house, and we'd play till the morning, cards or whatever. And Louis was one of the card players in the poker game. So when he created his show, the first season, the second episode was a poker game, and me, Louis, Nick DiPaolo, Hannibal Buress, Rick Chrome, Jim Norton, we were all in the poker scene in the Louis show. Weirdly enough, only Louis and I knew how to play poker. Those other guys.
I was just going to ask, who's the best poker player out of all you guys in real life? Who won the most money?
You know what? It was interesting because no one really won that much. We didn't try to kill each other because we played every Monday.
Right.
And, so it was, we did, like Sarah Silverman played and Louis and Colin Quinton and, on and on and on. I get some name dropping, holiday to tell you the people who played in our game. My next door neighbor was Brennan and Jay Moore, and it was just, there's always people around, during the poker game. And, I guess one week you'd win $30, next week you'd lose $60 or whatever. But, whoever won the most would buy everyone breakfast at like 5 in the morning at this little restaurant around the corner from me. So it was, it was good. We had so much fun, a lot of laughs, a lot of partying. And,
it was more for fun. It wasn't like you were trying to make money off each other or nothing, right?
Nah, it would have been really sad if we, we played seriously. We wanted to win, but we laughed. It was mostly about laughing. Again, because of that, in Louis' show, he decided to create a poker game, and that was this episode I was in.
Well, who knew? Who knew a friend like that just playing poker would lead to a TV series on FX? But
yeah, it was pretty great.
Also, you're part of another series here, 30 Years to Life with Tracy Morgan, another great comedian. How did you get involved with that?
Well, it was kind of interesting because when I worked at Letterman, I lost out on opportunities to act in a lot of things. Of course, I loved working at Letterman, so I wasn't freaking out.
Right.
But, I got asked to do an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm without even auditioning, and I couldn't do it because they were shooting the same time I was working at Letterman. There was a whole bunch of opportunities that I couldn't do films, but Tracy Morgan and I knew each other pretty well, and they were making a movie. He was the star of it called 30 Years to Life, and he had told them, and I didn't know this at the time, he told the director, I want Eddie Brill to play the manager. So weirdly enough, the Letterman show was off for 10 days during that time, and the timing couldn't have been more perfect. And I got to play a part in this movie, 30 Life. And I think the people I knew in it was me and Jim Gaffigan at the time. It was a long time ago. And Tracy was just so good to me, and him and I got to act together in the film, and it was really fun. Really, he was always
Oh.
very good to me, and another good guy. Really, really
Hmm.
love Tracy, and glad he's back to good health.
Sure. So it takes a toll on you. I mean, being a road comic and traveling to all these different countries. I mean, was there ever a part of you that thought, living out of a suitcase and, time missed with your family? I mean, yeah, like you said, who wouldn't want to be on the David Letterman show? But there's a cost to that, too, where you're missing out, on regular life events. I mean, was
Yeah,
there any part of you that looked back and regretted any of that you missed out on some normal stuff to have the success you had?
yeah. I think if I look back and when I'm doing it, I'm not freaking out or making decisions that told me what to do or what not to do. But I did lose out on most likely having a relationship and a family and all that kind of stuff. So that definitely happened. But I loved what I had done, and when I started working for Letterman, I was home most of the time because I had to be home so I can be there to do the warm up. So I traveled a bunch and I loved it. But Letterman we had 10 weeks off a year, and I would go to Europe or Australia or I was very blessed because I got to, and I don't very rarely use the word blessed, but I would go to places, when I had the weeks off, I got to pick and choose the really cool places I want to go to. I worked in Bangladesh, I worked in Australia, worked in Hong Kong. I got to see a lot of the world, which
Yeah.
was always my dream to do. So it was never, when I look back, I used to book comics on Letterman, and I spent a lot of my time working on other people's material. And if I look back, there's a fine line when I wish I was working on my material and working on my career at the time. If
Right.
you look back, but at the same time, I got the experience to be able to help a lot of comics, young and old, with the job that I had. It was really great.
Any comics you want to take credit for? You can say, hey, I gave him the big break. I was the
I don't
guy.
want to take credit for it. It's that they were
Well,
great
the
comics
opportunity.
who deserved to be on the show, and I have a few that I saw when I have a big amount of comedians that I saw when they were young, and stuck through with them and helped them along the way, and I'm very proud of those comics, and some of them are incredibly wildly successful now, and in movies and big stars, and I feel good. I go, yeah, I saw something in them when they were kids, but I think I think most people can see that I mean, not everyone, but if you're working in this industry and you really pay attention to people and pay attention to the arts and pay attention to what this kind of soulfulness that you see in music or comedy, you can say, oh, that person's going to do really well.
If you're talented, you get noticed in this business. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Everybody
yeah,
notices the same person, right? Well, speaking
yeah.
of talent, I mean, you performed in such places like the Shriners Auditorium, Radio City Music Hall. You've done some
Mhm.
ESPN corporate events. I mean, do you still get nervous after all these years, or what do you do to calm your nerves when you're playing places, legendary places like that?
Oh, I love it. I mean, I love it so much. I don't get nervous. I get adrenaline when it happens.
Really?
I get so excited when I get to do these things. Like when I was a little boy in Brooklyn, we used to go to Radio City Music Hall to see the shows. I remember seeing Herbie the Love Bug or the movie Oliver. Or, our parents made a big thing out of it. We would come to New York City and then we'd see the Rockettes and then to be able to perform on that stage. And I got to do it. I think three different times I got to perform on that stage. Once opening for Aretha Franklin at a corporate gig, which was one of the greatest gigs of my life. And I've had a lot of my dreams come true. I've had a lot of dreams come true that I never dreamed in the first place.
Right.
I am very, very grateful for what I did, and I put in the work. That's what I've learned. I learned from as a little boy watching my parents work very, very hard, and really, we didn't have any money when we were little, and it was pretty much the combination of hard work and love. As corny as it sounds, that really drove us and kept us
Yeah.
afloat, and it pays off. You put the work in, it most of the time it pays off, and I'm really glad that it has.
Good advice. A lot of young comics ask me, how do you get ahead? I say, you got to outwork the guy ahead of you. That's the only way to do it. You got to
Right.
outwork him,
And
yeah.
stage time is the only real teacher. It's the best teacher is stage time.
So get on there, sure. Well, here's what I got for you is I often say that this don't get enough credit, but voice work in comedy is a big thing, and you've been on Comedy Central's Dr. Katz doing some voice works, ABC's Science Corps doing voice work. Tell us about how does voice work fit into the world of comedy?
Well, first of all, it's really fun. Like right now, I'm talking to you. I'm in my pajamas, because we're doing a radio thing.
Right.
That's the great thing about being a voiceover person. You don't have to shave. You don't have to dress up. You can come there
That's a
in your
plus.
shorts and, do the job. My best friend and I in college, and still my best friend, Chris Phillips, he's a voiceover king. He was the voice of Comedy Central. He was the voice of Nickelodeon. He's done a ton of commercials and TV shows and stuff. And him and I, when we were in college, we would do a lot of voiceover gags and things for our comedy group. So it was really fun to play with our voices. And all throughout the years, I got to do a lot of commercials and cartoons. And, especially Dr. Katz was great because it was a cartoon. They made a cartoon of me. So, as a little boy who loved cartoons, now, one of
You're
the
on the
biggest
screen.
my whole life was having a cartoon of me, which is really nice.
That's great. So I mean, and you voiced yourself in that.
Yeah, I got to just be you go into the studio by yourself and you sort of do your routine in a conversational manner, and then later on they animate what you just did, and they also add Jonathan Katz. They would add him later as well, and it was just they pieced it together and created this incredible cartoon. And then the same company, it was Tom Snyder Productions. They created a show using the same squiggle vision that they did on Dr. Katz. And they created Science Court, which was an ABC show with the great Paula Poundstone as the judge in that one. It was a very smart, science kind of show for kids. And I got to play 2 or 3 episodes on that as well. But and I've done comedy albums. I like comedy albums, kid albums like Marmaduke, and stories and songs, and I played different characters, and it's just fun. It's really fun to be able to use your voice and to be different characters, and it's like a dream come true.
Now, did they come looking for you for that gig, or how did you stumble upon that?
Well, I knew Jonathan Katz because he was a stand-up comic, and so we worked together a lot, and his crew liked what I did, and they asked me to be on the show as a guest, and I did one of them. Me and Mark Maron were the guest on that episode, and then I got asked to do another one. And we recorded it, but unfortunately the show had gotten canceled before that series that we recorded came out. I think Janine Garofalo had done the next, or doing the next episode. But they did a new series, and then they contacted me through that. And, I would audition for a lot of things, which was really fun.
Stand in line for an hour, right? Well, you're probably big enough you don't have to stand in line for an hour, but most of us, we got to stand in line for an hour. I don't know. Well, you were lucky enough to be on the David Letterman Show, which is one of the legendary late-night talk shows of all time. But you go from one legend to another. Was probably the godfather of late-night comedy. You're currently the director of the Great American Comedy Festival that honors Johnny Carson, the godfather of late-night himself, in his hometown of Norfolk, Nebraska. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think it was 2007 when they approached me, the people from the town of Norfolk. Johnny Carson was born in Iowa, but he really grew up in Norfolk, Nebraska. And this was his hometown, and he loved it with all his heart. And he built a theater for the high school there, and it was, state-of-the-art, beautiful theater. And the people there wanted to do a comedy competition, like an amateur comedy competition in Johnny's name. And their idea was to put 60 comedians together and have them all drive in, audition, and they'd crown a winner. And I convinced them to do it a different way. I said, let's bring in pros. Let's bring in the best of the best. And, this is what Johnny did. Johnny helped young comics and will still help. But Johnny helped people at a certain point in their career. So I brought in a lot of incredible comedians who were just about to make it, And so we would, every year for 10 years, and I'd bring in, these comics when they were very young who ended up becoming famous. And then I'd also bring in, David Brenner and, Ed Asner and, people who were in the comedy business that were with Cloris Leachman, not only stand-ups, but people who were funny, great people, Paula Poundstone, Louis Anderson, Caroline
Mm-hmm.
Ray, and on and on and on, from the beginners to and I put them all together, and we do a weekend once a year, comedy festival, and I did it for 10 years, and it was really, really great, and brought these people had never really had comedy talent there, and they, and I knew it was going to be, horrific if they try to put 60 amateurs in there, and it was just going to be really a hard. It was a good idea to do a festival for Johnny, but I created the blueprint for the Great American Comedy Festival. I even created the name of it
Wow.
because I love Johnny, and I wanted young comedians to know who was really responsible for helping young comics throughout history, and I was very proud of it. Really, really great.
Know the history of comedy if you want to be a great comedian. That's definitely good advice there. Yeah.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
all these guys you gave a big break to. I mean, was there any someone when they hit the big time they called you up and said, "Hey Eddie, you gave me a break. You want to come open for me or pay you back at all?" Or
Well, I've had a lot of people say really nice things and call me up and thank me, and
that's worth it.
really, really nice. I mean, even when I was running the comp of the Paper Moon, I'd get calls like 10 years later going, "Look, you gave me a break when no one knew who I was, and you brought me to New York for the very first time." And there's a ton of those, and I get, a lot of people.
Yeah, you get
I
great
think I,
satisfaction. Yeah.
yeah, it's a nice feeling. It's not what I was doing it for, but it's really nice when people appreciate it.
Right.
And there are comics along the way that just I remember there was this young comedian, and she was I saw her, and she wasn't ready yet, but I knew that she was going to be a star. I just knew it, and I said, "Look, I'm going to book you for the Great American Comedy Festival. I'm not going to mention names." Well, I said, "Look, you're not in, I don't think you're ready yet to do big television, but I think if you hang out with this group of people, it will inspire you to take your work to the next level." And she appreciated it, and I got her on the thing. Eventually, she got Saturday Night Live, and she ended up doing films and other things. It's really, and it was nice because she didn't have to be a superstar when she was younger. I just thought when you put yourself in a group of people who are all really good at what they do, it forces you to bring your game up to that level. Like at Letterman, when we
Right.
worked at Letterman, everyone who worked there was the best in the business at what they did. The cameraman, Dave Dorsett, was Walter Cronkite's cameraman. There was
Right.
the lighting person was the best lighting person. The producers were the best producers. The writers were from Harvard. It's just like it was incredible. So if you put yourself in a group of really talented people,
Bring your A game, right?
yeah, it just inspires you to take your game to the next level.
Yeah.
So I put a bunch of people together and did things for them, and then it made me a better comic.
Yeah, it pushes you to do things you didn't even think you could do, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Wow. Huh. All right, so you're also part of the Woodstock Comedy Festival in Woodstock, New York. Tell us about that.
Well, that was another thing. A friend of mine, Linda Corradino, who I went to college with, who lived up in Woodstock, had a place up there. She also was responsible for MTV in the very nascent days of MTV and running the news department over there. She said we'd like to do a comedy festival in that area. And eventually we started to run a comedy festival and raise money for the local women's shelter in Woodstock. We had two charities, the Polaris, which, looked out for people who are getting, taken and used for human trafficking, and at the same time, so we ran these comedy shows in this incredible town of Woodstock, and there's a lot of history there, and a lot, went really well. We're recording this, you and I, in early 2021, and stand up hasn't, people are not performing, right now,
Right.
or so we haven't done any festivals or any comedy or anything like that really almost in a year, and so that nothing's really going on. But when we did the Woodstock Comedy Festival, we had again brought in some of the best talent in the world. Like we had Susie
Yeah.
Essman and with Gilbert Gottfried and Mario Cantone and then Dick Cavett and Bob Goldthwait, and I mean just on and on and on. And then we'd also bring up young comics to try to give them a break. And
Right.
we had little sort of not a competition, but a show where we raise money for the shelter, and then we'd find a young comic who could, shine and be in the group of the top-notch comics. It was a good
Opportunity, yeah.
formula. You raise money for a good cause. You put a lot of funny people on stage so people laugh. At the same time, you give opportunity to young
Right.
folks who are on their way up, and it's a win-win formula.
I would say you do what you love to do, plus you're helping people out at the same time. That's a win-win. Plus you're giving helping out the young generation, to bring up the next generation of comedy. Well, speaking of that, you mentioned, in Emerson College starting the workshop, but I mean, still today you teach a comedy workshop to help comics take their acts to the next level. So go ahead and plug your website. If somebody wanted to look up how to take this class, where would they go, and tell us
It's
about
funny
it?
because actually, since this has all changed, I'm getting a new website, but it's eddiebrill.com. But right now, it's under construction. A friend of mine is actually putting a new website together, which is really great. And I've had the website redone and by different people. Oddly enough, I've had interesting scenarios where I have someone do the website and then like, well, we're not no longer in the website business. Like,
No, yeah, thanks.
okay, I get a new one. But I'm mostly on Twitter on Eddie_Brill, Eddie EDDIE Brill BRLL, or Eddie Comic at Instagram, Eddie Comics
Okay.
EDDIE COMIC. And I'm on Facebook. You can follow me on Facebook there because I'm pretty much, filled up on there. But you can always follow people there. And I put all the information. I haven't taught a workshop in, 7, 8 months. That's again, I did one in California in October, which was really fun. But you have to be socially distant, and
Right.
you have to be very careful. So
So it's not an online thing. They can't take a class online like a Zoom thing.
I've never done
tried
it
that.
online.
Okay.
That might be something that I could do, but right now, it's kind of hard. Like I taught at Emerson where I went to school,
Yeah.
and I taught in Pennsylvania at a college, and I taught at a bunch of places. But we try to do a few online things. It's just not the same as being there in
Live.
person, and you could do it, but there's so much more powerful when everyone's in the room together and you're back and forth with feedback, and so much better.
So if somebody takes your class, well, I mean, what can they expect? What are some of the things that you do in your class that you teach?
Well, again, you can't. I don't believe you can teach stand-up, but you can learn from when you critique people, and when we say critique, we're not not knocking people down. We're giving suggestions, and it's a very positive, very high-end positive scenario. You learn a lot from helping others, and so the workshop that's the basis of everyone sort of helping each other, because you mostly project your ideas onto others. So when we do, it's a room where everyone gets to really look at comedy, look at it from a different perspective, offer their perceptions of you, and then you get to hear how people perceive you, and you get to learn and grow. And I'm very proud of that. I've done that, all over the world. I've taught workshops in many, many different countries around the world, and they've been very successful. Again, some people are like, oh, I'm going to take it. You can't teach me comedy. I go, you're right. You can't teach someone to be funny.
You got to be born with it.
What's that?
You got to be born with it, right?
You got to be born with it. That's like, I was lucky to be in a family because my mom and dad were so funny. My mom especially.
Right.
I was able to. That's what made everyone in my family really funny.
Made you a better comic, sure. Well, here's what I wanted to ask you about because, I mentioned I know Sam Kinnison's brother, and I know Carl LeBove. How I actually collected Sam Kinison memorabilia before I got started. I got about $10,000 comedy collection here, and I always thought, what's going to happen to this stuff after I die? I'm looking at it right now in the studio I'm in, and it's like, I always thought, I would love to donate this stuff to like a comedy museum where people could enjoy it as much as I had, because after I die, it'll probably end up in the dumpster. Nobody knows what I'm doing it, but you work with the American Comedy Hall of Fame, archives and talent department stuff, and you're doing some inductions for that. So tell it, because I always thought there should be some huge comedy hall of fame for all the comedy there is. There's not really a huge one, but tell us about what you're doing there.
There's this guy Jeff is an amazing guy, and he's been working for Archive. We've interviewed a whole bunch of comedians, and he's trying to create a Hall of Fame. Now there are halls of fames already in comedy.
Some smaller ones, yeah.
He's been working a lot with PBS and creating television shows like specials about Sid Caesar, and there was one I think on Joan Rivers, and this guy. He's amazing, and that's what they mostly do. But there is that one in Jamestown where Lucy was born, Jamestown, New York, and they're pretty much an actual museum right now, actual building where there's a lot of George Carlin stuff and that, so you might want to contact them and say, hey, look, I have a lot of Sam Kinison memorabilia.
That'd be the place to go in New York. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's the place right now. I mean, I wish the American Comedy Archive people had a building. They were originally going to come up with one in Las Vegas or New York, but, and also there's the people who run the Comedy Magic Club in California in Hermosa Beach. They have a bunch of comedy memorabilia, and they have it displayed in the comedy club and that stuff. So there's a lot of stuff, and that kind of stuff. It's either going to go in the dumpster with you, or it's going to be.
I didn't think about it when I was young. Getting older, I'm starting to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. As I've gotten older, I've really gotten rid of a lot of stuff. Like I had, not only comedy but a lot of music stuff, and I've actually kind of given a lot of it away. So that other people can appreciate it because, I remember I used to have like every, I was John Lennon fanatic, and when he died, I had every newspaper from day that he had died and all the articles. And I said, what am I going to do with this? I'm not going to take it out of the box and go, hey, everybody, you want to look at the newspaper from when John Lennon died? And nowadays, with the computers, you can just go online and you can see it there. Yeah. So I tossed a lot of that kind of stuff out, and it's been kind of an interesting time. I've been really cutting down on a lot of the, like I have a whole bunch of albums that I had saved, and I had like, 1,500 books, and I took half of the books and gave it to an old folks home in Brooklyn, and I have a library of 800 books, so they, it's to me, as opposed to sort of, holding on to it and putting it in a shelf, I'd rather have people, have it and be able to utilize it, and shared experiences that I had and the beauty I had. Like I have a bunch of baseballs. I have Hank Aaron signed a baseball, and Willie Mays and Reggie Jackson, and I have all these great baseballs. But what am I going to do with them?
Somebody else get the enjoyment you had, right?
And it's funny because I'm a very big fan of Roberto Clemente. I ended up becoming close with the family and hosting events for the Roberto Clemente Foundation. And every year I go, I meet these superstars. And I remember meeting Juan Marichal, who was one of the greatest pitchers of all time. And I said, will you sign the baseball for me? And he said, sure. And I said, please write to it. And he said, well, why do you want me to write to Eddie? I go, because that's my name. And he goes, well, it's worth more if you don't put name. And I go, I'm not looking to sell it.
I'm never going to sell it, right? Why would I sell something?
I'm looking to say, look, I met Juan Marichal. And the funny thing is, all these years later, like, I haven't talked about the Juan Marichal baseball in a few years, and here I am talking about it.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like, it's interesting what I think we have to, it's interesting what we have to do, what we hold on to. And I think that, weirdly enough, it's what's on the inside, as corny as it sounds, it's better to have that, all the stuff that I have on the inside is so worthwhile, to talk about fun, to share what's going on is great. I mean, I wish I had, I wish Kinison was still alive. I wish Robert Schiff, incredible to me, was still alive. And I wish, my sister was still alive, or my stepfather, or my mom, all this stuff. I'd rather have that than have a baseball signed, by
the real life stuff's more important. Yeah, I did it.
Yeah. You gotta see what's more important to you, you know?
Well, I bought the jersey, the Sam Kinison jersey that he wore for the MTV Celebrity Softball game. I bought that off Sabrina Sawari, who was Sam Kinison's wife's sister. And I said, I was like, well, why would you sell this to me? She's like, I enjoyed it for years, and it's just time for somebody else to enjoy it. So that's
nice. She's amazing. She's
great. Is, sweet girl, yeah.
Her and her sister, when they were young, this was the 80s, when I knew them.
Yeah, they're good people. All right, so you've had a legendary career in comedy. I mean, if you stop now, you could say you didn't have much else to accomplish, but comedy's an addictive game and nobody wants to stop. But
Never.
unfortunately,
Yeah.
we've all been put to a stop with this pandemic. I mean, in all your years in comedy, have you ever seen anything hit it close to this pandemic, or?
Oh no, never. It's just so hard. I've never gone this long without doing stand up. I did it in March, stand up.
Yeah.
Everything closed down. Then I did a gig, a weekend gig in California in October, which was really, really fun. But at the same time, it's I've only done that's the stand up. I've done Zoom stand up, but that's awful. It's just an
Yeah,
awful
right.
way to have to do stand up. And so yeah, it hasn't been really.
Well, I know in the '80s they said there was a big comedy boom, where there was a comedy club on every street corner, and then they were turning bowling alleys into comedy clubs. It got so popular, but then it crashed after that. I mean, was the crash
Right.
after that anything like this, or nothing close?
What happened was they had too many comedy clubs, and
Right.
they kind of the cream rose to the top, and a few just a few lasted long, and then but it's never been like this. It's never been
Totally
even during
down.
that
Yeah.
time you could put together shows, but you literally can't. I mean, you could put out a show on somebody's roof, and you can have like 25 to 40 people out there, and it's still stand up. But the whole great thing about stand up is everyone's sitting close together, and you're in an intimate setting, and that kind of stuff. That's the way stand up's supposed to be, in my
Right.
opinion.
You mentioned the internet shows. I mean, that's not like a live audience right on top of you. It's a totally different game. Have you tried any of the parking lot shows where, like, if they beep their horn, that's a laugh, or if they flick their
Yeah,
lights,
I
that's
just
enough?
don't. I'm
You
old
don't get it?
fashioned. I don't
Yeah.
want. I've heard from other people. Because people have done it and they've gotten through it and they feel good that they've done stand up again, but it's still not the same.
All
You
right. So, I
know.
mean, I know you're not a doctor, but what do you think that the future of comedy is? I mean, is it going to make a comeback, or how
Yeah,
long do you think it'll
I,
be?
I believe it'll come back. It always has. And
Right.
comedy's very essential, and I believe that it'll come back.
Huh. All right. Well, I had the fans write in, and I told them that you were coming on, so I picked what I thought were the top 3 questions. So I'll give you the top 3 fan questions. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right. Let's see. Randy Williams writes in. Who is your favorite discovery as a stand-up? They got his or her big break with an appearance you booked on Letterman. So it's a
Oh,
three-part question. So answer that part first, I guess.
all right. Well, it's an interesting combination because there's a guy named Joe Wong who you
Boston
know
guy.
no one had ever heard of him. He was working in Boston, really funny. He was a rocket scientist for a job, and even the Letterman producers didn't believe in him. And he went on to have one of the greatest sets in the history of the Late Show, and ended up not only having this incredible experience by working for the president and working with the red carpet through the Emmys for Ellen DeGeneres. He ended up becoming one of the biggest stars in China because of it. So that's one part of the thing.
Right.
And really kind of, I saw like Hannibal Buress, I would say Mike Birbiglia and Kumail Nanjiani. Those are young, when they were really young and no one knew who they were. Those are 3 comics that I'm proud that I was able to there's so many of them.
Yeah, you gave a lot of opportunity over the years. I'm sure it's tough to choose, right?
Yeah, so that's the answer to the first part of the question there.
All right. Second part of the question: what did you think of Dave's stand-up from his work in the '70s? Did you work with him regularly?
I never saw him really do stand-up. I saw him host Tonight Show. I saw him, on game shows and doing, little things. But I met Dave when I was working at the Comedy Store in LA, and at this time he was now hosting the late night NBC show with Letterman. So I didn't really know him when he was a stand-up, and I never got to work with him when he was a stand-up.
All right. The last part of the question. Now, you say you don't want to mention names. I won't blame you on this one, but it says, who do you feel was the most wasted talent-wise following a big break? I mean, was there ever somebody who went on the show and you thought it was...
Yeah, that's not the kind of question I want to answer.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. I mean, without mentioning names, well, there's anybody you thought was going to be a big comic, but it didn't really work out for him?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. It's
a
just
crazy
about the work,
game, yeah.
not putting the work in.
Right, I hear you with that. All right, Jeff Sylvia writes in, you've been around the world doing comedy. Besides the good old US of A, what is your favorite country to perform comedy and why?
There's a lot of them. Ireland is my favorite because I just love the culture. I love the fact that it's a country of storytellers, and they really, not only as a comedian, as a fan of comedy, I enjoy every time I go there.
Now, do they get like the references and stuff? Because I mean, they're speaking different languages. Obviously, they get
Yeah, they know more about, the education in Europe is so much better than American education that they know more about our country than we know about ourselves. They've been taught more, and yeah, there's so much pandering and sort of not, I don't hate our country. I love our country, but it's really incredible when you go to Europe and they know our culture better than we do.
Yeah, right. I was looking at my stats for the podcast. We get a lot of listeners. I found out 5% of my listener base was in Israel. But I don't travel the world like you. I had no idea comedy was even a thing in Israel. I saw that.
Yeah,
Shout out to my Israel listeners.
There's actually, I can't believe his name just slipped my mind, and I just saw it. I was just talking about him a couple of days ago. Anyway, there's a regular tour that goes over there, and they're very, they love comedy there. It's really popular. I don't know why his name. I feel bad because I'll think about it later. But he's a very funny guy.
Right.
American comics over to Israel, and it's a really big spot. And I love working in Australia because Australia is great, and they love Americans, and they're smart as hell. And I love Sydney, Galway, and Vancouver are three of my favorite cities, non-American cities that I've done comedy in.
Wow, yeah, you guys traveled the world. I mean, you've seen it all. All right, the final question from the guests here. This one comes from Scott McNeil. Well, this is a two-part question. You got one part from him and one part from me. His part is, I believe in the early years, for a while, he shared an apartment with Dennis Leary and Tony V. I'm pretty sure about that. So, part one, is that true? And part two, if it is true, Tony V is going to be a guest on the podcast in a couple of weeks. Can you give me a good story about him? So,
well, Tony V, that's true. I was in an apartment I had on my own in New York. And in 1987, I had decided to move out to LA pretty permanently, but I wanted to hold on to my New York apartment. And I talked to Tony and Dennis because we were, when I would stay in Boston, I would stay at their place. They shared a house in, upstairs and downstairs apartments in their house, rooms, floors in their house. And so, we worked, every time they came to New York to work the Paper Moon, they'd stay in the apartment. So I asked those guys if they wanted to split the rent three-way. Three of us can, it was like $200 each, it was, and we, were able to keep an apartment in New York. So very rarely were the three of us there at the exact same time. But, it was a tiny studio, but when we were there together, it was pretty tight. But yeah, no, we were there, we split this apartment, and eventually I was going to give it up, and the apartment, and I think Frank Santarelli had a part of it for a while. Going to originally give it up to Laura Keitlinger and Janine Garofalo were split. So that apartment has seen a lot of
comedy. Wow, yeah.
And stayed there. I lived with Jeff Garland and Janine Garofalo in LA. We all were roommates together.
Huh.
And I roomed with Robert Schimm in LA for a very long time as well.
Wow.
And Tony V. The interesting thing about Tony V is, Boston is such an incredible comedy town. It's one of the greatest comedy towns in the world. And again, I think the reason why, not again, but the reason why is that, the people who had put on comedy were like Barry Crimmins back in the day. They really cared about comedy, and they gave a lot of people an opportunity. And the audiences were really into it. It was a combination of many things. And, there's a lot of incredible comedians who started in Boston. But I think the best one ever was Tony V. Tony V was younger than a couple of these other guys who were, who became really legends of Boston.
Yeah.
But Tony never stopped writing and never stopped performing and never stopped helping other comics. And he's really turned himself into what I think is one of the greatest comics today. And he just gets better and better at it. And every time I see him, I laugh more and more. I just think he's smart, he's clever, and he's really amazing. And, it's hard to think of story. I mean,
can you give me a funny question? Give me a question. If you had him on, what would you give me? One question I can him, and I'll tell him the questions from you when I have him on. Hit me for a question for Tony V.
let's see. I don't know. The other thing about Tony is at one time we wore the same size clothes, and we would share. It's like, hey, is that my shirt or is that your shirt or who owns that shirt? I don't know. I just what kind of question? It's like, well, here's the interesting thing is that his son Gus is a comedian, and my son Daniel is a comedian. So tell Tony that when are we going to work together? Show we call Father and Sons, where me, Tony, Gus, and Daniel get to work together.
There we go. That's a great question. All right. Wow. What can I say? Eddie Brill, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. Before we go, I guess we'll leave it off on this note. You've helped out so many comedians. You've done so much great work. I mean, a lot of young comedians tune in this podcast. So if a young comedian came up to you right now and said, Eddie, I want to make it in this business. What do I got to do? What would your advice be to him?
Two things. Stage time is important, and write all the time. Continue to write. Make it your job. Even if it doesn't have to be stand up. It doesn't even have to be funny. Just write all the time. Get that muscle working. So and remember, work. The more stage time, the better you get at it. So it's a hard time now because there's very little stage time, but find a way. Like I'm sitting there, I haven't worked stand up except like once in the last year kind of thing, but I'm writing every day. I'm doing podcasts. I'm doing audio shows. I'm working on a film script. I'm working on executive producing this series. I just don't stop because you got to love it so much. It's like you're almost married to it, and that's what I am. I'm married to this comedy, and I love it with all my heart. So don't you need to put the work in, and it will happen for you.
All right, great advice from Eddie Brill. I thank you again for being on Funny Like Clown podcast, and I hope we're all back making them laugh soon. Take care.
Thank you, Dennis. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for calling in. Bye-bye. All right, Eddie Brill. Wow, legendary comedy career right there. Part of some stuff, local comics could only dream of being part of. Great advice from him, and outwork the guy behind you, how do you get ahead? You outwork in front of you, excuse me. Outwork the guy in front of you. That's how you get ahead. Nobody's going to hand it to you on a silver platter. Eddie, like you said, there was some sacrifice involved, but he was able to travel the world and do things that, most people dream of. So, on one side, are you willing to make the sacrifice to get ahead? And that's what it takes. This is Funny Like Clown Podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Wirth. We're doing comedy. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. And until next week's episode, keep laughing. Good night.